All right, welcome to the February 11th edition of the Santa Rosa City Council. Mr. McGlynn, item 3.1.
Item 3.1, faster Bay Area sales tax measure. Rachel Eade, Deputy Director, presenting.
Good afternoon, Mayor Schmudhelm, members of the council. Thank you for giving us your time today for this study session on the FASTER initiative. Joining me today is Kelly Fallon of the Bay Area Council. Kelly works for one of the organizations that's leading the charge on the FASTER Bay Area measure and is here to answer any questions you may have and get your feedback today. So I think everyone's aware FASTER is a proposed regional 1-cent sales tax measure for transportation. Currently, the organizers are aiming for the November 2020 ballot to have FASTER on the ballot in all 9 counties in the Bay Area. The 3 organizations leading the charge are the Bay Area Council, SPUR, and the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. The legislative sponsor is Senator Jim Bell, and so this is moving forward as SB 278. The FASTER coalition has been very inclusive, reaching out to jurisdictions throughout the Bay Area through this process, so this study session is part of that. They have developed a technical advisory group reaching out to transit agencies and CMAs around the Bay Area. So I'm currently representing City Bus and the City of Santa Rosa on the technical advisory group, as are staff members from SCTA, and SMART is also participating in the TAG. Our focus as staff has really been on understanding and providing feedback and input into the expenditure plan in terms of how it might forward some of the city council goals related to downtown development, housing development, affordability, and climate action. And there is, quite a bit of overlap between the council goals and what FASTER is trying to achieve. Another big topic of conversation, not surprisingly, is return to source. And if this 1% measure, 1% measure move forward, what would it mean for Santa Rosa in terms of revenues coming back for projects in our community? I did just want to highlight there's been a lot of press in the last week or so on Assemblymember Chu's AB 2057, the Bay Area Seamless Transit Act. And Kelly can talk about this with a little bit more expertise, but these are sort of similar bills moving on parallel tracks. Assemblymember Chu's bill really focuses on the structure for integrating transit within the Bay Area in order to provide more of a mandate for transit agencies to cooperate and integrate as a condition of receiving funding. FASTER, on the other hand, focuses more on providing the funding to achieve some of the outcomes that both bills are actually seeking to achieve. To provide just a little bit of context on sales tax, one of the first questions that comes up is, what does this mean for the sales tax cap? Part of FASTER is legislative action to raise the Bay Area sales tax cap by 1% to accommodate this potential increase. As you know, Santa Rosa's current sales tax rate is 9%. The current cap is 10.25%. You're all aware there are a number of upcoming measures, including 2 on the March ballot, the extension of the SMART Measure I sales tax, that's 1/4 cent. There's the 1/2 cent proposed Measure G, wildfire prevention sales tax. And then, of course, in November, we anticipate reauthorization or proposed reauthorization of Measure M, the local transportation sales tax, which we think will move forward as a 1/4 cent measure as it currently is today. There could also be a county mental health measure on the ballot in November at a 1/4 cent. So if both Measure G and this proposed mental health measure pass, that could increase Santa Rosa's sales tax rate to 9.75%. Just a little context on that. Just to be clear today, we're not asking council to take a position on FASTER. There's not an expenditure plan at this point in time to really review and take a position on, but we did want to have this opportunity for you all to ask Kelly questions, to give your feedback as this expenditure plan moves forward really pretty aggressively towards the ballot. So I'll turn over to Kelly now, and we should have plenty of time for questions at the end of the presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor Schmudhelm and City Council members, and thank you, Rachel, for that introduction. So as Rachel mentioned, my name is Kelly Fallon. I work at the Bay Area Council, and we're one of the 3 organizations working on FASTER, and we represent 350 businesses across the Bay Area. So I don't have to explain to all of you that congestion on our roads is increasing and it's really plaguing the region, especially when it helps getting people around, moving goods. And a huge cause of this is the deepening inequality and the fact that people are having to move further and further away from the job center to be able to get to their jobs. And one response to this usually is having good public transit, trying to get people out of single occupancy vehicles so if they're not on roads, they're not stuck spending hours of their day commuting to and from work or to see their family members. But unfortunately, our public transit has been inadequate in responding or filling that need in a lot of ways because fares are, prohibitively expensive. The coordination isn't really seamless for riders because you have to consider all the different agencies you need to use to get to your destination, or it's just not frequent enough to really make it a convenient use for riders. And so, of course, we're also seeing that our greenhouse gas emissions are going up, and that's a huge concern considering the climate change and the different impacts of sea level rise that we're expecting to face the region. So as I mentioned, to try to address this issue, these three groups came together, the Bay Area Council, SPUR, the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and this is something that we've been talking about trying to have a response to this since 2017. We put a pause a bit on doing some, really major, transformational measure like FASTER because of RM3 and considering, that as that was moving forward. And so as we've been doing outreach, this is just a bit of a summary of the outreach that we've been doing. We have conducted 9 different focus groups, have had 2 region-wide polls, have administered an online survey that we've been getting responses from different constituents all across the region, have had a lot of stakeholder meetings, and this is including one of them, where we've been using all of this feedback to try to develop our draft expenditure plan and what we should be including in this measure. And then on the right, you'll just see some of the different stakeholders and groups that we've had constant meetings with, some that Rachel mentioned, including the Technical Advisory Group, which is a gathering of local transit agencies and county transportation agencies. So from all this outreach, what we heard, which I don't think will be surprising to any of you, is that people know that we're in a transportation crisis, and that one way to really change this is to transform transit across the region to make it integrated and more seamless. People said that they were willing to pay for this change. We specifically asked in our polling if people would be willing to increase their taxes, and there was a resounding yes, 67% support. People do want outcomes. They want it to be fast and reliable and affordable and integrated with other transit agencies. And one interesting thing that came out from our polling is that there wasn't as much appetite when you named specific projects. It was more when we focused on the outcomes about having cheaper fares, having more frequent service. That was what really resonated with voters. And so, our vision of a faster transit service is having transit that comes every 15 minutes, and this is in most places, since we understand in some parts of the region this would be really difficult to do and maybe not necessary, but to really be competitive with driving alone in a car, you have to have transit that comes frequently, and that's reliable. And then another, part of our vision is really having transit that serves the whole region. So making sure that we are being able to get people across the region, that they're coming from further places to get to the jobs or get to their families more easily. And so, as Rachel mentioned earlier, we are looking at a 1-cent sales tax increase to have this kind of transformative investment to really change our network and make it the world-class transportation network that we deserve. And besides just the large investment of funding to build our projects, we're also looking at how to do some transformational change to the way that we deliver transit in the Bay Area. And so that is part of where we're trying to have this transit network planner, similar to the goals in Assemblymember Chu's bill, where our plan is to have MTC to put essentially this transit network planner in MTC, and that they would be the ones that would help coordinate fares and wayfinding and making the system just way easier for transit riders to use, and to also have them work on project delivery reforms, including looking at procurement reform, providing funding for hiring for workforce and items like that. And so one thing I'll just know, I think one of the differences between what we're trying to achieve with our transit network planner versus the bill that Assemblymember Chu is pursuing is just that in our legislation at this point, we would directly give that role to someone under MTC and not create a different authority, whereas Assemblymember Chu's bill, from my understanding at this point, is that they are looking to have a commission study what's possible and then potentially create a different authority through the legislature. And so FASTER is both looking at upgrading existing transit lines, so providing more funding for SMART, for BART, for the ferries that operate in around our region, but also helping to develop new transit lines, things like Valley Link and other services that can really help bring people where there's no service currently or very limited service. And we're also looking at including a rapid bus network and really completing the express lane network across the Bay Area. One reason why we call this out specifically and separately is because there's no real entity where this would fall under. At this point, a lot of the the planning and coordination for the for bus networks is at the county level, but we want to also include in our transit network plan this plan to really complete the network and make sure that we're helping connect people across the region through buses. And it's also a real a quicker way and less capital intensive to get people out of vehicles. So we're also looking at making sure that we're really adjusting the equity issues and the impact on different populations across the Bay Area. And so we know that the 1 cent sales tax is going to be a burden on low-income families, and one way we want to address that is by having the first in the state a sales tax fairness credit, which would essentially be modeled after the California earned income tax credit, where we would have brackets of essentially you would look at different households and their income and look at factors including the number of members in their family and provide a rebate that way. Any of the impact of the sales tax increase gets rebated to those households at the end of the year. Something else that we are going to be including in FASTER is expanding the existing Transportation Demand Management Program, which is currently administered by MTC and the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. And so there's already a requirement on employers to have to provide some pre-tax benefits to their commuter benefits to their employees, but there's not a lot of teeth, and we want to make this, we want to, one, make employers still have to provide that pre-tax benefit, but also provide some other form of funding to their employees. So that could be in the form of if you're already providing a shuttle or private ferry service, things like that to get your commuters out of single occupancy vehicles, that would qualify. Providing funding for bikes and active transportation facilities is another. And so really expanding that and also making it so that there's more teeth so that this is actually enforced. Because we know that that's some difficulties that MTC and the Bay Area Air Quality Management District have been facing. And I'll just note that we are looking at expanding this for private sector employees, not for public sector. And then lastly, we are committed to expanding the means-based fare program. We know that MTC is operating a pilot with a few agencies now, and we want to make that fundable up to a 50% discount for low-income riders on all transit agencies across the Bay Area, and also provide discounts to seniors and to students. So another thing is, the main goal of FASTER is to really look at how to connect the region with the transportation system. And so part of how we plan on doing that is, one, by providing funding to counties with collaboration with MTC to provide transit that really would move people across the region. So this would be, the projects like SMART and ferries, really moving people across county lines. And the funding at this point we have as a return to source to counties directly, so most likely the county transportation agencies. We also are looking to support, we do have in the measure currently support for local transit, so making sure that you can also get people that are further away from those regional big transportation systems, get them to those major centers through rides on local bus services and things like active transportation, having supporting walking, biking, micromobility, so scooters, and kind of infrastructure that really helps get people to that major regional transit. And then another, I touched on this a bit briefly, but we also, a big part of FASTER is providing some policy reform, because we know that there's a lack of trust right now from the public with really being able to deliver transit projects on time and on budget. And I think it's almost like every week we see a different news story about some kind of major project that's delayed, and of course that also increased costs. So we're also looking at how to create a transit network, a construction excellence center where agencies can go and really have that information at their fingertips, so they're not starting from page one when they're trying to implement a big transportation project. And another is that transit network planner that I mentioned earlier, where there's going to be more coordination across the region on fares and wayfinding. And so this is just a breakdown of how we currently have the expenditures laid out. So the biggest bucket is the first one, and those are the big regional, regional projects. So commuter rail, some light rail, things like ferries and regional buses. The second bucket is where we look into the more local connections to transit. And then the third is the actions that we're taking on making it affordable, doing the sales tax fairness credit, and doing policy reform. And then you'll see separately is the employer-funded contribution through the Enhanced Transportation Demand Management Program. And we have that separately because that contribution would be on top of the 1 cent sales tax. So it's not currently in part of the expenditure, the $100 billion expenditure. So finally, this just kind of outlines a bit of our next steps. And I wanted to mention here that you may have heard that we are now considering doing a joint measure with the housing groups. Essentially, we had polling that was done at the very end of 2019, and it found that if we both went at the same time, the big housing measure and us, that we would both likely fail. And so we, of course, we are, supportive of the housing efforts, and we didn't want that to be the case either. So we came back to the drawing board and we did some more polling, and there was a presentation 2 weeks ago now in front of MTC, and we discussed the recent polling, which showed that both measures could succeed if we went jointly and using only one funding mechanism. So what we're currently, it's very early stages, but what we're trying to do now is see how that can move forward, what would be required legislatively, and what the different breakdown of funding would be. We are only thinking of doing the 1 cent sales tax because it does provide the flexibility of funding and increases the amount of revenue we really would need, especially if we are going to do both housing and transportation in one measure. So that is the biggest next step, is figuring out what the best path forward for that is. And in terms of the legislative timeline, which may change as well, considering what we figure out with going jointly with housing, is we are moving through the process now. I'm going through the state legislature. Our spot bill, SB 278, already passed out of the Senate floor, but it will be moving. We're going to have to add legislative language to it very soon, and then it would be moving through the Assembly in April. And so we're looking at it passing out of the Assembly in April and then using May and June to wrap up any amendments to the bill. So that is the latest, all the information that I have at this point. And I am, really appreciate the time being here, and I welcome any questions.
Great, thank you for that presentation. Council, any questions? Mr. Sawyer?
Thank you, Mayor. And thanks for the presentation. And then this question may be premature, and if so, that's fine. You can let me know that you'll be getting back to us with these answers probably sooner than later. I'm happy to hear that there's return to source on the formula. We know how the current gas tax, the California gas tax, doesn't work all that well for Sonoma County. So are there models to suggest at this point what our annual return would be on our sales tax, and how long, since I don't know that number, how long it would take for us to build up enough money to actually affect comprehensive change in our system?
I do not know that off the top of my mind. It's something I will certainly get back to you, because we do have models about what the expected revenue would generate. I will note that our $100 billion estimate is considering a 2% growth rate, and that's over 40 years. And so it's $100 billion generated over the 40-year term. And what we're considering, because one thing that we also found when we polled voters is that they didn't actually have much of a difference in opinion in terms of doing a 40-year measure or something in perpetuity. So one thing we're considering is having the measure in perpetuity or until voters rescind. That way it would also provide some assurances that we can have the funding to operate what we build as well. But I will make sure to get back to you on some more specific numbers.
I appreciate that. And do you have a sense of what the administrative cost would be per year? What they are anticipating the administration to cost?
I'm not sure at this point. I'm sorry,
Okay,
but I'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Mr. Rogers?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kelly, thank you for giving us the presentation, the overview. I think one of the biggest challenges that this will run into in Sonoma County is our transit patterns are much different than Silicon Valley's transit patterns. And yes, we do have impacts from traffic, but it's a different conversation. And in fact, Sonoma County Transportation Authority did an analysis that showed that 89% of all trips that start in Sonoma County finish in Sonoma County during the weekday, particularly around travel commute times. So the most fundamental question is, if we were gonna ask our public to fund a full cent for transit improvements, why would we give it to this group rather than keep it within our county to do our connectivity within our county?
Thank you for that. And you're right, it's very, I think one of the things that we've been learning as we've been going through the process, it's just so difficult to do something on this scale because there are so many unique and different needs in each county. And even, you know, some of the counties you may think are similar, you know, there's just completely different kind of, you know, demands. And so, so yeah, you're absolutely right. That's been really difficult, you know, to try to figure out the measure that could really benefit the whole region. You know, we wanted to make sure that the counties were able to have a big say in the funding, and that's why, you know, for right now, the way we're currently looking at the majority of the funding in Strategy 1 would be 80% return to source, and that's still draft, but, you know, our return to source to the county transportation agencies, because we know that they have, you know, the best ideas about, you know, what the needs are for the region or for the county. So that's one, is that we wanted to make sure that there was a, you know, a significant amount of funding and room.
I just want to make sure I heard you right. So 80% return to source is what's being proposed?
That's currently where we, what we're considering for, and it gets, there's a few different distinctions when you go into different buckets and strategies, but for the bulk of Strategy 1, that is what we're currently looking at, is so the vast majority of the funding going back to the counties. It would still have to meet the requirements of, you know, being connected to, you know, the region, but there would be a significant amount of, you know, room, I think, for the counties to be able to work with that. Another, though, is making sure that we have, you know, and we have this built into the measure now, is that local connections to transit. So making sure that we're helping support, you know, city bus get around and get people to the big transit hubs, and also supporting things like active transportation. So there's a lot built into the measure that would support, you know, people locally and getting them around, and not just necessarily connecting on, you know, the big regional transit.
So if you could help us, because one of the things that we'll have to answer to the public if this does get on the ballot, how should the public look at this and not feel like it is us being taxed because other areas that have a lot of jobs have not kept up with housing? How do we not feel in Sonoma County like a bedroom community for Silicon Valley in a measure that is specifically designed at connecting regions rather than allowing us to have our own hub here?
It's a very good question and something, yeah, we'll have to think. I mean, I think even, you know, if it's not necessarily for, you know, for like your daily commute, there's a big benefit for, I think a lot of people are moving around the region if it's for, you know, for pleasure, for, you know, to visit other family members or elsewhere. I think there would still be a big benefit for, you know, local Sonoma County residents to have a system that is just more connected and seamless for everyone. And there are built-in benefits directly for Sonoma County residents, those that won't be leaving the region often, you know, having more frequent service, helping, you know, making sure that part of our funding is also helping with paving roads and doing things like that, you know, also impact how people get around. So I think there would be a lot of, you know, benefits, and I am happy to, you know, discuss a bit further with you. You know, but I think what we did find from the polling is that, you know, voters, and this is from when we polled everyone across the region, the voters really wanted to have a more integrated system that works, you know, for the whole region. And so I think that a lot of voters would end up supporting something that also is, you know, really going to connect the region better. But we do have benefits specifically for each county.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I appreciate that. Just so you know, only 4.8% of Sonoma County workers travel out of the county for work. So how we talk about this measure here locally is going to be really important. And if you haven't been meeting with our legislative delegation to talk about what priorities would be important to Sonoma County, I would suggest that you do so, especially since you guys have been meeting with city councils, and yet the legislation that is pending in the legislature or has been moving, that conversation needs to take place on that level as well. On slide 2, one of the things that you put was inequality is deepening. So why a sales tax and not a property tax?
So part of why we decided to go with the sales tax is because for one, it gives us a lot more flexibility than some other taxes and how we can spend it. So there aren't limitations on capital versus operating, and we wanted to make sure that we were able to, fund and operate what we build. And we know that a huge issue is, and some of the, having quality service is just not having the workers that can, drive the buses and that can get people around. So we wanted to make sure we had that flexibility, and that's one great thing about the sales tax. A second is that it just generated the most revenue out of everything that we studied. And we know, when we received some project lists we've received project lists from really everyone, from all the different transit agencies, from elected officials as well. And those were already totaling up to $300 billion. So we know, so even $100 billion isn't, quite enough. But we really need a significant investment to make the change that we need. And then lastly, it just, based off of the polling and information that we have, it seemed the most politically viable to pass. It is still gonna be a challenge, certainly, and that's part of why we wanted to build in a lot of the different mechanisms to address the potential impact on lower income communities, because we know that that will be, it will hit some families, and we want to make sure that we try to mitigate that as much as possible.
Yeah, just philosophically, food for thought, it would seem to me that property tax would be more equitable in terms of the places that would generate the most property tax are the places that have failed by and large to build housing. And this is a measure that I think does actually stem from that issue more so than lack of infrastructure, though we do also need to invest in our infrastructure. So that would be one of the comments that I'd make about it. How would the sales tax fairness credit work? Would individuals who use the public transit have to keep receipts to be able to then deduct it at the end?
So that's something, so we want to avoid that, because we know that that would be very complicated and would likely add a lot of issues and barriers to people receiving that credit. And so the way we're currently thinking of modeling the credit is by essentially modeling after the California earned income tax credit. And so not having a very specific amount, we don't need to necessarily know exactly what a household spent as a result in the increased sales tax, but we have ways to estimate what those households would have spent or would have added onto their taxes as a result of the increase. And so providing that rebate based off of those estimates and ranges and giving that back. And we're also, I'll have to, I can talk more and get a response to you, because Nick Jostefowicz at Spur has been the one leading that policy work, and he would have more information. But we also understand that a lot of lower income households don't file tax returns, so we're also, I can't remember right now, but that's something we're also making sure to address, is that we still get that rebate to households that aren't gonna be part of the tax return process every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just curious how that one would work out. You said that this would largely flow through MTC? The funds would largely flow through MTC, that'd be the accountability agency?
In terms of the, so a lot of the funding would go, it would go first to MTC, but then come as a return to source mechanism, or the different mechanisms that are set up to county transportation agencies or otherwise. But I believe the funding would first come to MTC and then be doled out. Okay,
and for the, I was surprised to hear you say that the polling didn't show a measurable difference between 40 years and in perpetuity. That's not consistent with what we've seen in Sonoma County, so something for you to keep an eye on as well, that the length of the tax actually does matter in our county. For the construction projects, would they have PLAs in them?
Yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Would there be a requirement around transportation demand management techniques for employers, and how would you enforce that?
So right now we are looking at different ways. We've been in conversations with different state agencies to provide some of that enforcement mechanism. And so I'm not sure of the latest. I believe we're looking right now at the Employment Development Department to see if they would have a way, based off of the information that they already collect from employers in the region, to make sure that they are complying with the program. And the way that we're looking at enhancing the Transportation Demand Management Program currently is essentially private employers with 50 or more employees. There's a scale from 50 to 100, 100 more, and then 1,000 and more. and there's a certain fee they'd have to pay per employee, and the estimate that would generate, I believe, is $35 billion from employers. And
Is that like an employee head tax?
No, not necessarily employee heads. I mean, it's essentially requiring them to provide an enhanced commuter benefit, and so it would be per employee based off of the size of your business, but it would be something that could be directly given back to the employee through a benefit, so through either giving them the money directly to the employee as a transit subsidy. So there'd be some requirements that it would be used toward transit, or if there's a program that an employer is already using. For example, Genentech has a private ferry and a number of buses that they use, and so we would calculate a way to see if the benefit that they're already providing is equivalent to the fee they would pay, then that would qualify.
Okay. What's the status of RM3's funding?
I am actually not
Regional
sure.
Measure 3.
Yeah, sorry, and I didn't clarify that earlier. I'm actually not, the last that I was aware, as I understand it's still waiting. There were two separate legal cases going forward, and they've been joined into one, and I believe it's waiting to be heard and considered in an appellate court. But I'm sorry, I'm not actually familiar with the very latest.
Could you remind me, was the legal challenge, was it based on the threshold to pass, or was it based on the authority to do a multi-county tax measure?
I believe it was not necessarily I believe it was maybe well, I don't want to say something I'm not sure. I'm not completely sure. So I can get back to you on that. Yeah, I can't remember right now. I don't want to say anything incorrect.
Okay, so one of the things that I'd want information on is whether or not this measure would fall into the same legal limbo that RM3 has fallen into. And just for you keeping track, RM3 passed with only 55% in Sonoma County. This is a 2/3 measure. We also had Measure A, which was 61% locally, which still falls short of the 2/3. So just to keep an eye on that and how you sell it to the public. All right, I think that's good for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions, Mr. Dowd?
Well, it's somewhat in line with comments and questions from my colleagues. I'm kind of stuck with this idea that across the Bay Area there is vast diversity in incomes, transportation modes, living styles, et cetera, So I think the whole concept is going to be very difficult to put together. I think that when we look at sales tax measures that keep coming before us as voters, I think there's somewhat of a lack of trust by the voters that something's going to be put on board that is reasonable, and a word that I think needs to be kept in mind is that somehow, and I don't know quite how you do it with a sales tax measure, that going forward, there's got to be flexibility in what you do and not lose the trust of the voters when you make changes because something you put in place isn't working well. And I don't know how you get all those things in the same place.
Yeah, no, thank you for that comment. It's, I think that, part of addressing the trust from voters and the, amount of, there have been, recent tax measures that have been passed, or the increase in the bridge tolls from RM3 to go to transportation. So that was the question on our minds, is there appetite from voters to increase taxes again to do something like this and to fund transportation specifically. From our polling, we did find that we were essentially right on the margin of 2/3 of support, which we would need across all Bay Area counties to pass something like this. But they indicated to us, at least through the polling, that there is an appetite to do something like this, a real major regional transportation measure. And I think one way that we are trying to address the concerns about project delivery and the trust around the process is through the Construction Excellence Center, having a transit network planner, trying to show that things are going to be different and that we aren't going to just provide more funding without any structural change included. So that is, part of the way that we are trying to address that issue with trust, because, we agree that there's a lot of, you have to make sure that voters are, going to see the benefit for them, and that it's not going to just be an increase and not any direct or immediate kind of implementation of something that will improve their lives. And so, one other thing that I'm sorry I forgot to mention earlier is that, in FASTER, we're also, we're focused on, the outcomes-based projects and having projects apply through a process where you have to meet certain eligibility criteria to receive funding, but we're also going to fund in the near term, in the first 10 years of the measure, fund projects that can be implemented very soon. They've already been through, different processes of being evaluated, and we know their benefit and impact on the region and their county the project is coming from. So we hope that that is another way also to show that there are some very specific projects we will fund through the measure, and this is something that voters can benefit from.
Thank you for those comments, and I recognize that you have joined into something that's going to be a significant challenge, trying to get all the pieces put together, and I compliment you and the others for working on it. And I think when you get to a spot where you start to put something on the table, I think the devil's going to be in the details and how it all fits together and how people throughout the region feel they're being treated fairly.
Ms. Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your presentation. I have a couple of questions. One is around what thought, and if you've already went over it, if you could talk a little bit more about any plans to increase education in order to improve ridership.
So we do, the extent that I know of at least is that we have some set aside for the marketing and help with outreach on this. And so that was something that came through in our technical advisory group process, is that there really needs to be funding for the different transit agencies and other, different entities that will be involved in really rolling out different projects, that there is a significant amount of community outreach and just more marketing and information. And one other thing that I'll note somewhat related to that is that we also have funding set aside for to help any businesses that are impacted. So if there's construction happening for a transit project right in front of your business, having funding available so that there's, if the business has to close for some time, that can help cover rent and things like that. And so I don't have the
municipality that gets the sales tax from that business too, right?
Right, yeah.
So I was also curious about, would there be specific, I know we're not at the programming level, but specific ways that this could go toward targeting groups that have higher levels of needs, like children and seniors around transit?
Right, so part of the measure now is we do include some funding for school buses and paratransit, and part of the means-based fare / like low-income fare subsidies is to provide reduced or free fares for students and for seniors. So
when you say students, do you mean children or do you mean people in school?
So K through 12, so yes, people in school.
What about for children 0 to 5?
Off the top of my mind, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we have anything specific there, Jim.
I'll just make the comment that I think most transit systems in the Bay Area, under 5 rides free, and that's certainly true for city bus.
Well, under 5, right? So if you're not enrolled, if you're 5, and I just want to make sure that we don't have create a donut hole.
Right, fair point. And that's something we can.
You don't have mandatory kindergarten in the state of California. You can be 5 and have to pay and not be a student.
Right. And I think that actually speaks to some of the other goals of this initiative, as well as the Seamless Bay Area initiative, which is like, can we all get on the same page about what's a child versus a K through 12 youth, and avoid the donut hole sort of phenomenon. So I think that's
childcare too, right?
It's a good point.
Thank you. And then the last thing is, I'm glad to see you. Not the last thing. The second to last thing is, I'm glad to see you address the challenges with a tax return based rebate, and I think that while the earned income tax credit works in a lot of ways, that it is challenging. So I'm hopeful that we can do whatever we can to get the money back to low-income families without creating more headache for them or for the administration of this proposed legislation. So the other thing is, would there be a strong component to this, or even a component that would allow us to leverage grant monies from the federal, state and federal, I mean, this is state law, but from federal governments in order to be a more self-help oriented model so that we can get more bang for our buck?
Yeah, our hope is with having this level of investment from the region that it will make localities more, competitive for its, federal funding, state funding. And, one thing that we've noticed is, I'm not sure if you're familiar, in 2016, that LA County, Los Angeles County passed Measure M, and that has also helped them be competitive for that federal and state funding because they're showing that there's a big plan for their whole county, and they're just, in a significant investment from the county itself. And so our hope is that having, such a huge investment from the region will, further help with those matching grants.
Thank you.
And I could just add a comment to that too. For City Bus, our operating revenues are also our local match revenues. So we have had years where we haven't had the local match to go after some opportunities. So any measure, whether it's our local Measure M or this type of measure that brings in truly local money, it is a real benefit to be able to try to leverage some outside funds.
Appreciate it.
Any additional questions? I had a couple, specifically regarding the buses. What is the plan for the electrification of transit routes and buses? Is there going to be incentives? How is it going to be dealt with?
That's certainly one of the priorities for funding, is to show that if you can have transit that is going to be, has zero greenhouse gas emissions, and that is, green transit, that will be one of the, that gives you essentially priority over some other projects, if that is one indicator in the project that is applying for funding. I think at one point we're hoping to include that as a mandatory requirement, but we know that there in some, at least near term, projects that could be pretty difficult and prohibitive, but it certainly is one of the ways that we want to prioritize, projects that will be green.
So is that written somewhere, or is that just still in the talking stages?
Yeah, so that's, so right now essentially we have a draft framework. It will be written into the legislation once that's available, and we're essentially at the point where we're still trying to get the feedback and finish all of the edits to the legislation, and once that's available, we'll make sure to share widely, but that will be, specifically cleared, or laid out into the legislative language.
Okay. And could you pull up slide 9? There you go. So it struck me how complex the system looks, and then Sonoma County, it looks like stick figures up there. And so when we start talking about priorities, one for this region is the Highway 37, you say an existing rail line. So how would the priorities be decided? And again, looking at if all the interest, it sure looks south of where we are, but that 37 is a big challenge for us. Who decides the priority and the amount of dollars that would go to that type of a project?
Right, so it would be a competitive process of applying for the funds based off of which kind of bucket you fall into. So if it's a regional, express bus, it would be, a project that would be competing with other, projects that are, applying for that funding across the region. And it would be communication through, I believe right now it's set up through MTC. But I would also note that with Highway 37, we also are currently planning on having funding specifically for Highway 37 to help we know that there's a lot of issues with sea level rise and the flooding affecting Highway 37, so there's some current plans to include that specifically in the measure.
Specific set aside dollars from the entire region or just from the Sonoma County bucket?
I'll have to double check that, and I can get back to you regarding Hawaii. Yeah.
Okay, those are the only questions I had. We have a couple cards on this item. First up, Mr. DeWitt, followed by Eris Weaver.
Hello, thank you. My name is Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland. I'm an alternative transportation user, and I'm also a person that doesn't agree with sales tax increases because they're the most regressive taxes, and they affect the low income more than the well-to-do. We already have a sales tax in place in this county for a transportation system, which I don't think is too smart. I actually ride the Golden Gate Transit buses. I can get to the city all the way into the financial district in about 2 hours and 20 minutes. Sometimes I use veterans shuttles, can get in there in an hour and 10 minutes using the high occupancy vehicle lane. I have a serious concern about the way it's going to be sold. How you sell it to the public was the term. I really appreciate the questions that all of you asked. They're very pertinent and very important. Essentially, Sonoma County folks don't even ride the bus system here much, and they get it for free if they're students or veterans. And I use that bus, and they're empty a lot of times in the evening already. So one of the things that really needs to occur is a societal shift, which I don't think you're going to have occur. Most folks don't ride bicycles, especially mothers with 2 children trying to bring their groceries home over in Roseland. I was at a meeting one time where our Santa Rosa city planner said that a project was going to be transit-oriented development because young folks were going to ride their bicycles. And that's not happening in Roseland. Young families use SUVs. They use bigger vehicles, get their kids in there, go where they're going. Older people may give up their car for a different type of transportation, but it's going to have to be something that's more user-friendly and less expensive. Not many folks I know use the SMART train. It was set up, in theory, to help workers commute, but they won't put a stop over in Roseland where we have the highest amount of people who are low-income workers. Actually, what they're doing at SMART is putting in another stop up in Marin County. Well, excuse me, it's down in Marin County. And they're helping the relatively well-to-do employed people down there get away from using their cars. So I don't see anything in your proposals yet that are helpful to Sonoma County people or to the young working class folks that I'm in contact with in the area just across that freeway. They're not using public transit now, so how is Santa Rosa gonna first? Hopefully you folks will look into it and keep all.
Thank you, Dwayne. Eris Weaver, followed by Brian Ling.
Weaver, Executive Director of the Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition. I've been in some conversations about Faster with other bicycle advocates around the Bay Area, but I still have a lot more questions than I do comments because this is such a big, complicated thing and with a lot of questions unanswered, so I'm just gonna kind of throw my questions out into the conversational space. One of them is what percentage of the funding is going to go to bicycle and other active transportation measures here in Santa Rosa? For example, a majority of trips are done within 5 miles, which is a sweet spot for cycling. So I'm curious about that. You had one slide up there with a bunch of the different public input and focus groups and meetings and things like that you've done, and I'm wondering how much of that was actually done here in the North Bay and how much of it was done with bicycle and other active transportation groups, because I haven't personally seen a whole lot of that coming my way or here in the North Bay. Another question that I have is that this has mostly been being talked about as a public transportation measure. So when you were talking about building the transit network, I'm imagining more, bus lines and buses and train tracks and all of that. But then in answering another question, you said something about money for roads. And so I'm a little confused about that and how that is going to be divvied up. And then I have another question about when it goes to a vote, that it needs a two-thirds to pass. I'm not clear, is it 2/3 of the entire Bay Area bucket, or is it 2/3 in each county? Because it's a little scary to think that if it's 2/3 of the whole Bay Area bucket, that we could have the whole North Bay vote against it, but still have to do it. That's all for me, thank you.
Thank you. Brian Ling.
Thank you for the presentation today. I'm Brian Ling, the Executive Director of the Sonoma County Alliance. We're a 380-member organization of businesses and individuals here in Sonoma County, and business advocates for a healthy economy and a healthy environment is our tag. We also, I'd like to say, we supported Measure M here in Sonoma County, Measure Q in Sonoma County, the pending Measure I in Sonoma County, and and a number of failed measures prior to those. But this one, I can't imagine any way that my board would approve doing this. But for the fundamental thing that's being said directly, and maybe not as harshly as I feel, but we're way more of a giver than a receiver in this deal, and we don't like it, and we need money other places, and the fact that Highway 37 is going to be taken care of otherwise, I got a hard problem with that. It seems to me that the other thing that surprises me, I've talked to Sonoma County Transportation Authority. I don't believe they asked to be in this. I haven't heard from any city council that asked to be in this. I haven't heard from anybody in the North Bay of the agencies that asked to be in this. So it seems like it may be more prudent for those of us that support or oppose these measures to try to get Sonoma County removed. So that's my question. If anybody would like to reply either tonight or in the future, it doesn't have to be tonight, but how can Sonoma County get removed? If it's the legislation that created FASTER, that we need to modify that legislation, or is it this pending legislation that we're talking about in April or later, that's where it needs to get addressed? But I think for Sonoma County, and all of us are trying to get a lot of transportation measures dealt with separately, I think it'll save us a lot of time and money to try and get out of this. So if there's an answer how we can get removed out of this block, that would be my question. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So bring it back to council. There's just a couple that I would like clarification on that I heard. Is there a percentage tailored for bicycle transportation?
There is, I can't remember at this point, so I'm happy to get your contact information to follow up.
Okay, and then what about the 2/3 vote? Is it individual counties or the region as a whole?
It's the region as a whole.
Okay, and can counties opt out of participating in this measure?
At this point, there's no, yes is the short answer. There's no, specific, nothing's been passed in the legislature, nothing's been approved through MTC yet, so conceivably, yes.
But we would have to see what the actual, it's got to be written somewhere to actually give that provision to the measure?
So essentially, it would be through the enabling legislation that we're currently exploring. So that is where it would detail where the sales tax, would be, where the increase would be applied, and all of that kind of information would be in the enabling legislation. And that is, still, it's just now moving through the process, and the legislative language hasn't been inserted yet. So yeah, that's not set in stone.
So if someone had that interest, who would they share that opinion with?
We could, I'm happy to give my business card, and then I can connect with the appropriate people.
Great. Councilor, are there other questions? Mr. Tibbetts?
I just had a follow-up question to that. Specifically, the Board of Supervisors cannot vote to opt out if the enabling legislation proceeds.
I'm not positive, but I believe, they can't. Yes, I believe that's, if the enabling legislation, yes, authorizes it.
So I think the question will come back is when the legislation is produced, if the council so wanted to utilize our resources to pursue removal of the county, that would be the space, and that would be the space the county would pursue in the legislation itself.
Is that better to do sooner as opposed to later?
Without written legislation, we don't know what we're chasing. So we would be watching that, and if the council wanted to bring us back, and I suspect SCTA will be watching it as well as the league's policy group for the North Bay will be watching that as well.
Thank you.
Councilmember.
Any additional questions? Okay, is there anyone on council like to make any final comments? Mr. Rogers?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I do appreciate you coming in and talking to us. I know it's early in the process, but as you can see, I think from the public and from the council, there's a lot of fundamental questions that haven't been answered yet. For me, my primary concern, and I'm a big advocate for alternative forms of transportation to get people out of their single occupancy vehicles. For me, my primary concern is that this is a county that has passed 2 quarter-cent sales tax measures already to fund transportation. Half of that goes to the SMART train, half of it does go to Measure M, which has been our successful roads measure that we've leveraged 5 to 1, the dollars that have been put in by this public to the dollars that we've drawn down from the state and the federal. Both of those are up for reauthorization this year. So Measure Q, which funded the SMART train, is up in a little bit less than a month. And Measure M, which we don't know what it will be on the ballot, that one is up in November. And my biggest concern is that having two measures that are similar in scope, but one tailored to the local jurisdiction versus one where it's ambiguous what we're going to get back from it, is going to drag down our road funding measure that we desperately need to reauthorize. So for me, I'm interested in hearing the rest of the details as we move forward, but as it sits right now, I am highly likely to push to not do that measure, not to have it on the ballot. And I just hope that you all understand that whether it passes or not, putting it on the ballot will jeopardize local jurisdictions' ability to pass their own measures. And I know that that's why Mountain View voted, I think, just last week to oppose this measure as well. So it's something that we'll keep a close eye on. I would also really strongly urge you to work with our delegation. I know Senator Dodd and Senator McGuire have a good relationship with the author of the legislation, but we're gonna need to feel pretty confident in Sonoma County that our needs are being heard and that our needs are being addressed, and I don't feel that way yet.
Any other comments? Thank you. I do appreciate you coming for this presentation. It's nice to get a little bit earlier versus being so far down the road, so I do appreciate your time and energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you for all your time.
And we'll take about a 2-minute recess and reconvene at 4 o'clock. Everyone to the regular session of the Santa Rosa City Council meeting. Go have an announcement of roll call, please.
Let the record show that all council members are present with the exception of Council Member Tibbetts.
Thank you. Report on closed session, Madam City Attorney.
Yes, the council met in closed session this afternoon on 4 items, I'm sorry. The first 3, 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, each concerned existing litigation. And on each of the 3, the council gave direction to legal counsel to move forward. On item 2.4, council met with the labor negotiators and have given direction to the negotiators.
Great, thank you. We have no proclamations. Staff briefings. 7.1, Mr. McGlynn, anything to report?
Yeah, Assistant City Manager David Guin is coming down to report.
Thank you, and Deputy Director Gabe Osborne is going to join me as well to help answer any questions if there are any. We wanted to give a quick update on housing numbers. The big question has come up about what happened in 2019, what were the housing number production levels, what's going on with the rebuild, and kind of where we are today and where we're going coming into 2020. So we put this together as a quick update for council, and just for setting the stage, we broke this down into 4 different areas. So the land use approval is the first step of getting a house built. In the rebuild effort, most of those homes are rebuilding, so they didn't have to go through this process, but most homes in Santa Rosa have to go through this process, and we have about 3,000 homes, units that are in that batch. So those are people that have entitlements, they've passed the entitlements, they can come in and get a building permit any day, but typically they have to go find financing, do other things, determine if they want to sell the project or move on or build it. And so we typically, that's less of an investment from a developer standpoint. Once a developer gets into coming into our office and submitting a building permit, that's a big investment. It's an important step, so we capture that date to make sure we know how many building permits are coming into the system, so we know what the true activity is going to be within the city over the next year or two. Obviously construction, once it's in construction, we want to know what's happening there, and then the unit's complete. So I was going to break this down for you. This is the units produced over time in Santa Rosa. So in 2016, 2017, 2018, you started to see a slight rise in terms of number of units produced over time. 2019 numbers, when we first saw these, obviously we're probably feeling the same as you. Those are a lot lower than we were hoping them to be. Those are new units created within Santa Rosa. But when you look at the rest of the story about what was going on in Santa Rosa at the time, we had the fire rebuild, and we completed 795 rebuild units too. So in terms of the number of housing units built within the city, we did have a much bigger production than we typically have seen. So we started to feel that from contractors, from labor, from materials, in terms of the stress on the system to be able to produce housing units. A lot of the contractors in this, that show in this bucket, the completed homes in 2019, are now moving over into other housing unit construction throughout the city. And we'll show that here on this next slide. So in 2019, we units completed, about just over 1,000 units within the city. The interesting number here, the next interesting number is how much is under construction today. Actually, this is as of January 1st. We have over, about 1,500 units that are currently under construction out there, either in the rebuild or throughout the city. So the blue represents the 470 that are under construction throughout the city, the 1,026 are the rebuild. So that's the activity that's currently going on today. And then the other more important number is who came in and submitted a building permit to build a new house this year prior to January 1st. And that's this number. So you start to see the shift from rebuilding into other housing stock. So that number of 1,500 units that are currently have submitted building permits, they're invested, they submitted building plans, they're working their way through our system. We haven't seen those type of numbers since the 80s, I think, is when we started to see those big other So there is a shift and a change from the rebuild effort, and we are hearing it from contractors that are shifting their activities from rebuilding into other parts of town. And this does not include anything that's been entitled and hasn't walked in for a building permit. So we do have projects in the downtown that are moving their way through the system. We have other projects that haven't quite made that next step. So that number is going to continue to change over time. So to put it in perspective, these are the kind of big numbers. Over 1,000 units completed in 2019. That includes the fire rebuild. There's over 1,400 that are actively under construction, and over 1,800 have submitted building permits that are going through the system right now. And to get a quick sense of what that is in terms of what type of units those are, on the left-hand side are the what was built in 2019. So we saw a majority of single-family homes being built. The interesting part is the stuff under construction now and coming in the future, we're starting to see a lot more multifamily housing that's coming through. And that's a lot of that has to do with what the policies have been put in place, the interest by the city council and the interest to densify our housing stock. The other interesting thing is ADUs. So this has continued to rise. When the city council changed their policy, reduced impact fees, we saw a big bump in 2018 in terms of number of 82nd units that were applied for. That number continues to grow. We continue to see a big demand for second units. Again, that jump to almost 200 applications for second units was in direct correlation to those policies you put in place back in 2018. So we wanted to make sure that this data was available all the time, so what we've created is an online dashboard. Thanks to Gabe and his team, Joshua Darmron and Brian Baca and Jesse Oswald. We get a lot of requests for housing numbers. We modeled this based off the rebuild. So if you're familiar with the rebuild numbers, the live data that's out there for what's happening in the rebuild, we recreated the same thing for housing citywide. So this is not rebuild, this is just regular citywide housing production. So you can get a sense of where projects are, what's under construction, what's through the permit process, how many ADUs are out there, how many permits are coming in, and gives a sense of what's actually happening on a day-to-day basis. And then on our website, we did post at src.org/ped, and we'll put this other places, the 2019 numbers, so you have those, they're locked in. People can go to that site and get this information, and we'll post this presentation there as well. So that's what we've got, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. And so I did hear you correctly. You will send that to us so we can have copies of this?
Correct.
Great, very impressive. Questions, Mr. Tibbetts?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, David. I think, you know, it seems like we're still pushing a rock uphill, but we are pushing it pretty well. And my question is what do you see as still the largest impediment? I know we've gone through a lot of revamping of our permitting process. Also, we've done it in such a way that promotes downtown and core development in particular. But what do you see as the missing link in a lot of these permits not turning into active construction sites?
We're seeing a big push to actually turn a lot of those permits into active construction sites. We're seeing it mainly on single-family homes, multifamily up to 3 stories, but where we're seeing the big hurdle is anything over 4 stories, 5 stories. When you start to get into a concrete podium structure with units on top, we're finding the concrete elements are the most expensive parts and drive the cost up such that cause financing issues. So downtown development has been a challenge, it continues to be a challenge, and it's something that we're not gonna let up on. We're close on a few projects that hopefully we can daylight soon, but that seems to be the biggest impediment right now is once you get into concrete, anything over the 4 or 5 stories.
So the cost, when the cost to build downtown is the issue, does that mean that becomes a conventional lender issue and the ability to finance a costly project?
We hear financing is usually the biggest issue at this point. Nobody's, we don't get too many complaints about our process. People are impressed with what's going on, what the city council's done, the fees, impact fees, the process, the timeline, the reduction in discretion, the time constraints, all that's been addressed. So really it comes down to the financing that we're working on. So we're working with organizations such as the Red Renewal Enterprise District to identify funding out there to help supplement and try to close the gap.
Okay. Is there anything on the horizon that you can share with us about how we might be able to fill that gap?
Not at this time, but hopefully we can share that soon.
So I just finished testifying in front of the Little Hoover Commission, and I said one of the biggest things the state could start to do is reward, instead of worrying about so much behavior that they're not happy with, why don't you reward good behavior and invest in communities that are making these types of risks and taking these types of sacrifices. So we continue to try to address the financing, but a lot of this is also getting the state to worry less about sticks and maybe more about carrots with some of their surplus.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Mr. Rogers.
Thanks, David. Just to clarify, you made a comment about how you're starting to see a shift away from the single-family homes into multifamily. There was the chart of 2019's data. Yeah. Is that based on what you're seeing for permits being pulled in 2020 in relation to this chart?
Yeah, so what this is showing is actually permits that were already pulled, or submitted. So this is either under construction or building permits. We're continuing to see more multifamily come through. I think the next batch of projects that are coming through that haven't walked through the door, but we know they will any day, a lot of them are multifamily, big multifamily projects. So I think that number is gonna grow on the right-hand side of the graph.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Any other questions? I have one card on this item, Mr. DeWitt.
And something missing was how many units are affordable. Essentially, the city of Santa Rosa has never been able to catch up with its regional housing needs assessment requirements and has always built above market rate mostly. And so it would be really nice for a breakdown that shows us where the affordable is getting built. That's a key question too. Where is it at? A lot of people feel it's over, whatever might be considered affordable, is coming over into Roseland. We have hundreds upon hundreds and hundreds of housing units being constructed right now with no upkeep on the infrastructure, repair of the roads, any of the things that should be very important with this housing and the building of it. I'm very glad that housing's being built. I hope we build a lot of housing in the future to take care of any of the problems we have with lack of housing. But the biggest lack before the fires was in affordable housing for those of moderate income, lower income, and extremely low income. So hopefully all that good work they're doing, they're also breaking down those numbers so the public can see it. It wasn't in the binder tonight, so we came in here and you find out about it after the fact. Hopefully you'll have this posted on the city's website so the public can know what's occurring. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. So again, thank you. Oh, go ahead, Mr.
And I didn't mention, and I should mention, we are in the process of breaking down the affordability levels of these units. We're gonna put that online as well. We wanna break down each year status and what level of affordability they are in that. So that's actively working on right now, and hopefully we'll have that launched here in the next week or so. The other thing that we're going to be is in the works is a map. So we'll show all the housing units that are under construction, affordability levels, just like the rebuild. So we'll be able to mimic what we did in the rebuild to show where units are located, what the status of that unit is, and what affordability level that is. So all that's under works. And again, it is all on the website at src.org/PED at this moment, and we'll continue to grow this site. We just want to make sure you have these initial numbers to start with.
I'm very appreciative, just because I know you and I've spoken to many developers, and we're doing all these things, and to actually see what some of those results are. And I know Mr. Osborne and others who have been involved in the rebuilding process in both Fountain Grove and in Coffey Park, those dashboards have been so helpful where you don't have to wait for a city employee, you can do it yourself. So I'm very appreciative of your efforts in this area. Any other questions or comments? Okay, and I do want to wish birthday wishes to one of you too. All right, Mr. McGlynn, 7.2.
7.2, Laguna Treatment Plant Recycled Water Supply Update. Joe Schwal presenting.
Go ahead, turn it on.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. I'm here today to give you an update on the recycled water storage that we have at the regional water facility. As you may recall, What's going on? Okay. As you may recall, I came by about 6 weeks ago to discuss the situation we were in when we were storing water at a greater rate than we would normally have stored for the time of year due to the impact of the Kincaid fire that shut down the geysers pumping. So as a way of background for our recycled water storage management, our goals each year are to maximize the reuse of recycled water and to minimize any discharge that we may have to make into the receiving waters. We have several variables that we have to deal with, some that are in our control and some that are not. The ones that are in our control is essentially how much water we can pump up to the geysers steam fields in any given day. What's not in our control is how much rainwater there is, which in the wet season, which will increase the water that comes through our wastewater plant, and then we need to store it in the wintertime. And the other variable really is how much water and when we can irrigate in the summertime. When that irrigation season starts is a variable depending on really what kind of a spring we have, whether we have a cool, wet spring or a warm, dry spring. This is our storage curve, which shows in the lower left, the red line is coming in the lower left and then rising from October, flatlining it really from October through November, and then starting to rise rapidly from November through December. Shows the increase in storage that we incurred while the geysers pipeline was out of service, where when it reaches about 100 million gallons there in the first week of December, you can see it starts flattening out. That's when the geysers pipeline was back in service, and we've been pumping at the maximum rate ever since. Because we've been lucky enough so far to have very little rain this winter, we have not had to store excess water. And as you can see, where in early December, we were maybe 450 million gallons higher in our storage than we would have been or would normally be for that time of year. Now we're closer to about 125 million gallons higher in storage. So we're getting closer to our kind of our normal operating range for the season. But if we were to project ahead for the rest of the season using average flows for February and March, even with the high pumping rates that we would have to the geysers, we can see that we could still be reaching our operational limit of about 14.5 million gallons. I'm sorry, 1,400 million gallons of storage. So if it turns into a normal winter, sometime this year, we can expect still to perhaps be needing to discharge before the end of the season. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Claire Nordley, who can then talk about programs to try to minimize the amount of water that we're storing.
Good afternoon, I'm Claire Nordley, the Water Use Efficiency Coordinator. So thank you, Joe. Like I talked about a couple of weeks ago with you all, we are doing a winter water conservation campaign in order to minimize the amount of water that is flowing into our treatment plant. As you may all remember, the program started in December and it is going to run through March. Our three key main messages are for our customers to schedule a free Water Smart checkup at their house, replace inefficient fixtures, and find and fix leaks. So I do have to say our customers are incredible and they respond really well to requests for conservation. So we have had in January, we had a 4 times increase in the number of surveys that we scheduled at this time last year. So customers are definitely responding to our requests for conservation. And in February, we're already scheduled for the entire month of February. So customers are definitely responding to our requests to schedule free Water Smart checkups, which is great. And then today, just wanted to remind you all, we have a workshop this afternoon at 6 p.m. at our utility field office talking about finding and fixing leaks. So we have a good RSVP rate for that, and we're looking forward to educating our customers tonight on fixing and finding leaks. With that, I'll turn it over if any questions.
Council, any questions? I just had one, if you can go to the slide 4. Yeah, that one there. So if you're looking at, I mean, we're already halfway into February and it has not rained, and I don't see any rain in the near future. So are we predicting will be deluged with rain, or how often does this get updated?
So I needed to prepare this slide at the beginning of the month. So that you're right. If we were to, we could just move that flat line farther over to the right. We're projected to not have any rain for the next 10 days. So that gives us gets us to the 20th. You could move that sloped line, 10 days to the right. The thing about our storms, of course, is that's an average slope, but our storms don't come in averages, right? They'll come in 5 days deluges. So, February, even if it starts raining on the 20th, could become a normal month.
And I guess I would ask, because this is very helpful information, I think I would ask just that council be updated constantly regarding this, so members of our community would also understand. If we do have to discharge, what does that mean? Rather than wait for a discharge and then we update, here's what we had to do. I would just ask if we get regular updates on this as the weather progresses or doesn't progress, just so we can understand the impacts to our environment. It'd be very helpful.
Certainly.
Any other questions or comments? Do you have comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the fact that we have not had to have discharges of treated wastewater to this point is a real testament to the work that you and your team have done. And I know that myself and the mayor were eager to have this information presented so that we could note that this has been managed exceedingly well. And you guys come forward and are so humble about the work that you do and the projections. And I see that Tom has become a meteorologist, which is really interesting. But really and truly, you guys have done great work. And we don't clap in the chambers, but fantastic. Really, truly. So thank you to you and the team.
Thank you very much.
And we'll try to end by 6 so we can all get to the free workshop. So thank you for the presentation. Mr. City Manager, do you have a report for us this evening?
Yes, a brief one. The City of Santa Rosa's Housing Authority was awarded the Department of Housing and Urban Development's 2020 Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Program of the Year Award by HUD Region 9's Public Housing Director's Office. The award recognizes outstanding achievements in HUD VASH program, which combines supportive services from the Veterans Administration with rental subsidies administered by local housing authorities, and nationally has helped reduce homelessness among veterans by 50% since 2010. The City of Santa Rosa's Housing Authority also received, alongside the Sonoma County Housing Authority, the 2020 Disaster Recovery and Resiliency Award for extraordinary efforts during the Kincaid Fire.
Great, thank you. Madam City Attorney, you have a report, and if you want to include item 8.1.
Yes, I have today our quarterly report of settlements and active litigation, and I just want to walk through very quickly a summary of what we have. We have 2 reported settlements this afternoon. Solar versus the City of Santa Rosa, which is a $50,000 settlement to compensate the plaintiff for significant injuries that were suffered as a result of a fall on the sidewalk. And the second is the reformation of former Police Chief Robert Schroeder's employment contract. The original contract, which was executed in 2015, contained an error of law. The contract purported to authorize the chief upon his retirement to deposit certain defined amounts of accrued but unused sick leave and vacation into a tax-free retirement health savings account. Those authorized deposits, however, were above the amounts allowable under federal regulation and under our city's retirement health savings plan. So to correct that error and to provide the chief with equivalent benefits, the council approved a reformation of the contract pursuant to California Civil Code Section 3399. So in lieu of the disallowed deposits into the retirement health savings account, Chief Schroeder was authorized to cash out the equivalent value in accrued but unused sick leave and vacation, and that amount was approximately just under $93,000. In addition to those two reported settlements, we were able to resolve 3 additional cases in the final quarter of 2019, included 1 settlement under $10,000, 1 dismissal of a case with no cost to the city, and then 1 litigation matter in which the city received payment rather than having to pay out. After those cases, those 5 cases were resolved, we still have 24 active cases in our office, including 10 personal injury cases, 4 police matters, 4 code enforcement matters that are in the Superior Court. Of course, we have other code enforcement matters that are under administrative proceedings, but these are the ones that are actually in Superior Court. And then we had a variety of other cases, including our PG&E litigation, which we've talked about quite a bit, and also litigation concerning homelessness issues. In addition to our existing pending litigation, this in the 4th quarter of 2019, we received 7 new claims were referred over to our office. So that is the state of our litigation in our office, and I have nothing else to report this afternoon.
Thank you. Any questions from council members on it? Thank you so much. And I do want to go back to the city manager's report. I think you missed one other announcement that occurred in Napa. And I would invite everyone to join me in a round of applause for the 2019 City Manager of the Year, Mr. Sean McGlynn.
Thank you. I just, as I said to the staff and all my colleagues here at the city, this is a group award because I get the pleasure of working with the best damn group of employees in the state of California. And I just want to take the moment to commend them and thank them for getting recognized with me last week.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and congratulations to you and all our employees. With that, council, do we have any statements of abstention? Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I abstained from item 2.3 in closed session.
Mr. Tibbetts.
Thank you. I'll be abstaining from item 12.8, the homeless emergency declaration, 12.9 Railroad Square issue, and that's it.
Okay. Any other abstentions? All right. Mayors and council members' reports. Who would like to go first? Mr. Rogers.
All right, so we had our monthly SCTA meeting yesterday. 2 things of note for the council. The first was we did approve a 3-year e-bike program. That'll be 300 shared pedal electric assist e-bikes with the potential for a couple more if we see the demand is high enough throughout the different smart stations. So you'll start to see those rolling out in Sonoma County and in Santa Rosa specifically over the next couple of months. That should be a lot of fun. The second one is we did discuss a straw man proposal for what the Measure M reauthorization funding measure would start to look like. Santa Rosa has $326 million in projects that we submitted, and Santa Rosa City Bus has $352.6 million in asks, including electrification and better headwinds, as the mayor was talking about. Just as a quick breakdown, and if you have input, I'm happy to hear it, and I know that there will be other opportunities as well, but 40% of the measure as it's currently being discussed would go to fixing local roads and potholes, 18% would go to add bus service, 2% would create discount programs for seniors, youth, vets, and folks with disabilities, 2% would focus on zero-emission buses and charging stations, 2% would assist with last-mile connections, 11% would build new bike lanes, 23% would do specific projects, including things like the bike pedestrian 101 overcrossing bridge that we've submitted, and then 2% would go to new technologies as the measure progresses. So happy to discuss a little bit further. As a note, because I know it has been a conversation topic that we've discussed in council, the measure brings in about $26 million a year. If we were to do free public transit throughout the whole system, it would take about 20% of the measure off the top, and only pulled at 38% support from the public is something that was important. So obviously the measure hasn't been fully baked yet, but at least from our perspective on council, where we have gone with targeting specific groups that need help getting onto public transit is probably the direction that the Measure M will go, but let's discuss that further as we move forward.
Okay. Any others reports on the side? Anything here? Ms. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I have a report on the Water Advisory Council. We met last Monday, and the Sonoma Water and the Technical Advisory Council is going to be bringing forward a presentation about rate increases on February 19th, or excuse me, in March. They'll be meeting again on February 19th. And one of the things that I encourage them, along with the mayor, to do is to bring us increases that are predictable and don't exceed CPI or cost of living increases, so that they are predictable and don't exceed what people actually are making across the board. Another thing is that our water supply conditions, thanks to the standard deviation, we've had fewer mandatory releases, and Lake Sonoma is at 91% and Lake Mendocino is at 100% of water supply. So this is representative of a good partnership with the Army Corps and good work on both Sonoma Water and our city water. Further, the biological opinion, for those of you who are following this one closely, regulates the flows that have to come out, the mandatory flows for fish and habitat. And the implementation of this will be having a public meeting on March 12th from 4 to 6 p.m. at the Healdsburg Community Center. And for those of you who cannot get enough water, nobody else thinks that's fun. The Potter Valley Relicensing Project, the hydroelectric project that is in process of being turned into potentially a 2-basin solution. You can find out more information when you cannot sleep at night at 2-basin solution. And I'm gonna spell that out because there's so many ways you could get this wrong. It's TWO basin, B-A-S-I-N, solution.org. And this is important because the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee holds the rights to diversion of water, and if we don't get a solution to this, Lake Pillsbury would have implications for Lake Pillsbury. See, I can be taught about water, it turns out. Okay, end of report.
Thank you. I have several items to report on. First off, we had the Climate Action Subcommittee meeting on January 29th. We received an update of the Climate Action Plan. We gave a little bit of direction to staff, and then we had a very brief presentation, and they'll be coming back to further update us on VMT and vehicle miles traveled and how that pertains to the general plan. Anyway, so we'll be discussing that at our next meeting. There's also an interest of having us meet more regularly, and I believe Mr. McGlinley will be a topic of conversation at our goal setting on the 12th and 13th. As I mentioned to members of the audience, our Planned Economic Development Department that does a fabulous job, and what we saw earlier today, they also support the Climate Action Subcommittee, and we have capacity issues, so I'm sure that will be brought up as a topic of discussion at our goal setting. I also attended the State of the County address on January 31st, received an update from Chair Gorin and Mr. Nicholson from UCLA Economic Update, which was interesting. He spoke two things that stood out for me. One of the things with the coronavirus, one of the potential positive impacts of that would be that people are not traveling to Asia for vacation. They may be coming here to Sonoma County and other areas that we would welcome those tourists that are looking for someplace to go and spend some money. So that was a very positive part of that address. Also attended along with some city staff, and I really appreciate city staff attending Santa Rosa Together and other community groups partnering with the community, healthier neighborhoods, and better local government. And the speaker was Jim Dyers, who was the former director of the Seattle Department of Neighborhoods. So it was very well attended by staff, very interactive. Then it's my understanding the second day on Saturday, about 100 community members attended, along with city staff too. So I very much appreciate the integration of city staff at both of those days to figure out how we can do a better job of working with our community members. And myself, along with Assistant City Manager Jason Nutt, Police Captain John Cregan, and Police Lieutenant Dave Becker, and a representative from the Sonoma County Animal Services, attended a listening session at Montgomery High School related to some of the recent dog bite attacks that have made the news. So it's very helpful to talk with, there's probably about 20 or 25 community members there to understand what does Santa Rosa PD do in regards to loose animals, and what is Animal Services, and what is our role in coordinating that. So a lot of good information was out there, and I think some of the more community members may even be looking at starting another group to find out, do we need to update some of our regulations, coming to council and offering their suggestions. We also had a Build Rebuild ad hoc meeting on February 4th, where we talked a lot of information that was just presented at today's date earlier. And lastly, we had a Home Sonoma County Leadership Council. Ernesto Oliveras and I attended on February 6th. And you might have read in the paper some of the funding decisions that had to be made. In Governor's last budget, he allocated $12.1 million for homeless services to Sonoma County. In Governor Newsom's budget, that was reduced greatly. Newsom's budget took it from 2 buckets, 11 biggest cities to the continuum of cares. Newsom's budget had 3 different buckets, 13 largest cities, continuum of cares, and direct allocation to the county. So unfortunately, from the continuum of cares perspective, our funding went from 12.1 million to about 3.6. This county of Sonoma had overall funding of about 3.2 million. Bottom line, what that meant was about 34% reduction in homeless services of those service programs that we funded last year. So there will be some impacts. I know a lot of the service providers in the community are trying to figure out how we're gonna do and what impacts to the homeless services we'll have for the rest of the county. So more information on that, I'm sure through the city manager, you'll be sharing that information with us, but those are some very difficult decisions, nothing that anyone wanted to do, but when the funding levels go from 12.1 down to about countywide $6.7 million, a lot of those cuts needed to be made. And with that, item 10.2. Madam City Clerk, did you want to cover this item, or how do you want me to do this?
Mayor, before the council are 2 submissions for consideration to be appointed to the RAN board and the, which is the Remote Access Network. There's 1 position that must be filled by a mayor. Mayor Tom Schwedhelm is the only one who has submitted a letter of interest. And then there's a appointment to the Child Care Planning Council, 1 position to be appointed, and the only letter of interest that was submitted was from Councilmember Fleming. So council can decide whether to support those and have the designee or the, I don't know who's going to be attending. I think it's Councilmember Dowd will be attending the meeting and in support those appointments at the Mayors and Council Members Association.
Thank you. So I would entertain a motion if someone would choose to make a motion on those 2 nominations. Mr. Sawyer?
Thank you, Mayor. I will move that we accept the willingness of our 2 council members to serve in those 2 positions.
Motion is second. Any further comments? Your votes, please. And that passes unanimously. Thank you. So Mr. Dowd, if you could represent that at the meeting this week. Approval of minutes. Were there any additions or corrections to the January 28th regular meeting minutes? Seeing none, I saw you captured the one correction I sent, so we will accept those minutes. Mr. McGlynn, consent items.
Item 12.1, resolution, approval of general service agreement F is 002071, HVAC maintenance and repair services. Item 12.2, resolution, contract award, design build parking access and revenue control system for parking garages. Item 12.3, resolution, cost recovery lien against the real property located at 641 McMaster Lane. Item 12.4, resolution, submittal of application to the State of California Department of Housing and Community Development's Infill Infrastructure Grant Program for an amount not to exceed $30 million for a qualified infill area in the downtown station area and Roseland area. Item 12.5, resolution, submittal of a joint application to the State of California Department of Housing and Community Development's Infill Infrastructure Grant Program for an amount not to exceed $5 million for Burbank Avenue Apartments, 1400 Burbank Avenue. Item 12.6, resolution, extension of proclamation of existence of a local emergency due to 2017 fires. Item 12.7, resolution, extension of proclamation of existence of a local emergency due to 2019 Kincaid fire. Item 12.8, resolution, extension of proclamation of local homeless emergency. Item 12.9, resolution, 1, approving the Historic Railroad Square Association as the management organization for the Railroad Square Santa Rosa Community Benefit District. 2, approving the Railroad Square Santa Rosa Community Benefit District Management and Disbursement Agreement. 3, increasing appropriations to the Economic Development General Fund. And 4, authorizing the Finance Department to disperse assessment funds.
Thank you, Council. Any questions? Mr. Tibbetts.
Yeah, I submit to the Vice Mayor the possibility of bifurcating 12.8 and 12.9 from the general consent calendar so I can participate.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Mr. DeWitt, you're up. You filled out several different cards, so if you could please limit your comments. You've got 12.3, 12.4, 12.5, 12.6, and 12.7, and we'll keep Mr. Tibbetts here. And you get 2 minutes on each of those, although you don't need to take all 2 minutes on each of those.
Thank you, sir. I understand your directions. What I would like to do is speak on 12.4 and 12.5 together, and then the emergency ones together because they're distinct and separate items. So
again, just for that, please don't speak on 12.8 until Mr. Tibbetts can leave the chamber.
Thank you, sir. With that in mind, on 12.4 and 12.5, the pursuit of the grant money from the state, while a positive thing, it needs to be done with the concept of codifying and requiring the rental residential units to be put in first. And the reason I bring this up is because we have a history here in Santa Rosa and Sonoma County of developers coming forward and promising that there will be rental residential housing built and then doing a bait and switch. Building above market rate housing first, switching that rental residential over onto the taxpayers, having it be something through Burbank Housing with taxpayer funding coming forward instead of the for-profit developers getting things done. So with the MedPen proposal that's happening in Roseland, it's been struggling for years because their appetite was bigger than their budget. And they've put the cleanup of the toxic sites onto the taxpayer. They were told originally that there was toxics at the site. It wasn't a good deal to do, but the supervisor at that time felt it might be helpful. So now it's cost millions of dollars. The taxpayers are picking up the cost of the toxic removals, and it's essentially blighted Roseland for many, many years. So I'm hoping that you will put forward as an elected body that it has to be codified and required for residential rentals to be built first. So on that 1400 Burbank Avenue project, it confuses a number of people because 1400 Burbank Avenue is the property that the Skellinger brothers originally sold to the Agricultural and Open Space District 10 full years ago, and then was deeded to the city of Santa Rosa. So the site that they're building, it makes people feel that you're going to go in there and build on that former Skellinger brothers property. I'm hoping that they'll use a different address in the future, and I've read through the file and see that Mr. Skellinger, one of the family members, is the person doing the Waterstone development project. I would like, once again, to have it be put in to whatever written documentation that goes forward, that it be the first thing. In his letter, it states that it's going to be the housing that comes in first, but no offense to him, it's just that historical record here in our county that could be switched out unless you codify it into law with the city attorney. Thank you for that item. Now I'll switch to the emergency items of 12.6, 12.7, and 12.8. So for years now, we've been under an emergency situation, and it's the kind of thing where I'm hoping that you will soon declare we're past that, because essentially the only thing that hasn't really changed much is the homeless crisis that's been with us for decades. The other things are moving forward fine now. As that housing presentation given earlier by Mr. Guin pointed out, we're probably past that emergency situation. And it basically grates upon people in the community when they see things happening because of the emergency. Over in Roseland, we're having to accept all kinds of extra housing because of the resiliency ordinance, being told, well, it's by right. It has to come forward because of those emergencies that happened. The folks up in Fountain Grove are wealthy enough now. Everything's been, as far as I've been told, compensated for by insurance companies. And it's the type of situation where you can say, okay, we're past that. Coffee Park maybe is different. That's people who basically were in a far more emergent situation in a sense. It's been pretty much rebuilt. It's going forward real well. So I'm hoping you'll put an end to these emergency proclamations soon, except for the homeless emergency proclamation, because you're nowhere near solving that one. It is something that's staying with us. I appreciate that you, Mr. Schwedhelm, and others have come forward. Tomorrow night at 6:30 at the Roseland Library, Linda Hopkins will be there for a candidate forum, and she's been really helpful to try to get this thing solved also. But I'm really certain it won't get solved unless you take the other emergencies off the burner and go for that one first and foremost. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions from council? Ms. Vice Mayor, you have this item.
Yeah. I'd like to move items 12.1 through 12.7.
Second.
Motion and second. Any comments? Your votes, please, then. And that passes with 7 ayes.
And we'll just wait a moment for Councilmember Tibbetts.
He's doing it quicker, though.
I know, he's getting better. At least
Don't
the
go
cane is
down.
gone. I thought it was kind of stylish, personally. Okay, I'd like to move items 12.8 and 12.9.
Second.
Motion and second. Your votes, please. And that passes with 6 ayes with Mr. Tibbetts abstaining. Thank you. Let's see, not being 5 o'clock, no report items, we'll move to 15.1, our first public hearing.
We can't do that.
Oh, no, we can't. Sorry about that. So we're gonna have to take another recess for about 8 minutes and we'll reconvene at 5 o'clock. Okay, we'll reconvene the council meeting. We'll be on item 13, public comment. First up would be Dwayne DeWitt, followed by Kim Schroeder.
Hello, my name is Dwayne DeWitt and I'm from Roseland. And I wanted to mention once again that tomorrow at 6:30 at the Roseland Library, Linda Hopkins, the county supervisor for District 5, in which that part of the city of Santa Rosa, Roseland, exists, will be coming to speak with Roseland residents about some of the issues that are coming up. One of the main things that I hear when out talking with people in the community is that they're feeling overwhelmed with the traffic and roads not being repaired. So this year, typically, and each year you would have a few roads that get repaired. Due to the fires a couple of years ago, not as many things getting repaired over in Roseland. But there was an agreement put forward with the annexation that went before LAFCO, and there was a cost-sharing situation that was put forward. And to many of the residents, it feels like that's almost been put on the back burner. And this is a difficult time because not just hundreds, but perhaps thousands of new housing units are being built in that Roseland area, which is already the densest place, not just in the city of Santa Rosa, but the county of Sonoma. So one of the things that has come forward is there needs to be another forum with Santa Rosa leadership coming to Roseland and talking with the Roseland residents. They can't make it down here to meetings. They can't get off of work, and many of them need to have a translator there at the same time. So I'm here to ask you tonight, after the election in March, to perhaps have a joint listening session with the elected District 5 supervisor and come over there and express your love for Roseland, because it's yours now, and you're just going to the state asking for grants, for money to build things. Come over there and talk with the people and let them know you're going to get some things done, especially the residents of Hughes Avenue. The Hughes Avenue Neighborhood Association feels retaliation came into play because they basically pointed out a former Recreation and Parks employee wasn't doing right. And their road has never been repaired now for decades. And the same thing with the Burbank Avenue Neighborhood Association. They feel that they've been mistreated. So how about coming over there and spread the love and repair Hughes Avenue, Burbank Avenue, McMinn Avenue, Corby, all the other roads. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dwayne. Kim Schroeder, followed by Marjorie Brunel.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and City Council members. My name is Kim Schroeder, and I'm following up on the email I sent to Council on January 9th regarding the 7 4G, 5G small cell towers proposed by AT&T that weren't included in the city's PowerPoint presentation at the December 10 study session, yet they were in process. These 7 are in neighborhoods, and 1 is in front of an apartment complex on the JC campus. Little to no notice was given to property owners nearby proposed sites. I, among others, spoke to numerous people near and adjacent to the proposed sites, finding only 1 or 2 noticed in most neighborhoods, none in one of the neighborhoods. This took multiple visits to reach people who weren't home the first time. Furthermore, it's the city's responsibility as the agency issuing the permit to issue notices, not AT&T or other telecoms responsibility. We can't trust them to provide accurate info to our residents, and this is a conflict of interest. The notification letter sent out is misleading and inaccurate. It claims better voice coverage for one, but more importantly, there isn't any warning related to property values, safety, and privacy. I brought copies for each of you tonight. They don't include a picture of what the cell tower will look like, nor does it state that AT&T as with Verizon, can add height, width, and increase power output of the tower over the next 25 years, and other telecom companies will place their equipment there as well. These are examples of critical items in the public's best interest to know. Equally as important, the point of contact for the very few notices sent out was AT&T, not the city. AT&T is controlling it all, from creating, mailing, and being the point of contact for questions. This violates typical city policy regarding permit review and processing. It is also in violation of the process for minor conditional use permit applications described in the zoning ordinance. For example, for the 401 College Ave location, the notification radius per the permit file includes homes and businesses along College, Lincoln, and Glen Street. We found only one resident who was notified he plans to sell his home, yet the other countless homes closer to the proposed cell tower did not, including several families with kids, a cancer survivor, and an EMF-sensitive resident, all who are opposed. For the neighbors near 287 Buena Vista, not one single neighbor received a notice, not even the families whose address is on the application. They have kids and strongly oppose it. In looking at this permit file, a notice was presumably sent to 287 Jones Street, not 287 Buena Vista. That isn't a valid address in Santa Rosa. Due diligence is not being performed here on many levels. There appears to be a disconnect between council's direction and the city after a powerful study session December 10th. There are critical factors to be included in the ordinance needed to protect our community. Petaluma and Mill Valley are excellent examples. I've reached out for one-on-one meetings by the council, and I am not getting replies. This is an urgent matter. Perhaps an ordinance is in process. Please call back to set up a...
Thank you. Marjorie Burnell, followed by Jim Kelly.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Marjorie Burnell. I've been a resident of Sonoma County for about 30 years, and I'm here today to bring to your attention some facts you may not be aware of what's happening in your downtown area regarding sustained physical, emotional, sexual abuse and harassment to me and my animal at 306 Mendocino Avenue, where I moved in July. Shortly after I moved in, people began to position themselves in the doorway to grope my dog, rub my dog against their bodies, to crouch down and put the dog between their legs. This has been going on since July routinely and has been escalating. Now I have people following me when I walk the dog at night, making sexual gestures, staring at me in an unwanted way, and saying things like, "She's so pretty, she's so young." It has become abusive, sustained, disturbing, so that I have been unable to access my home in a safe manner. I've also been subjected to, out at the Sonoma coast, I was walking my dog at Goat Rock when two gentlemen came up to me in the parking lot. One said, "This is a gift from your gay fathers," and 2 minutes later the dog starts squealing in pain, has a rectal prolapse, and starts having a painful bowel movement. The same thing was repeated again the next week at Westside Park. This was when the dog was less than 4 months old. About a month after that, I'm in my car, and the dog, what is said as we're camping out at the coast is, the dog, I was told to lick here, meaning my crotch. I removed the dog from my lap. I was fully clothed. This has become that teaching a dog to do sexual acts, I believe, is a legal activity, and I want it recorded here in this court, and I want the sustained physical, emotional abuse to stop, and I need your help in that. It is happening every time I step out my front door. I have people trying to grab my dog and kiss it on the mouth, turn it over on its back at meetings I belong to, civic groups, and saying anybody can do anything to your dog, and that's the word on the street. And if we're all condoning that kind of behavior and abuse and hate crimes in Santa Rosa, I think we need to bring it to the attention to the public and to other civic organizations, and we need to stop it now.
Thank you. Jim Kelly.
Hi, Jim Kelly. I'm a lap swimmer over at both places, Ridgeway and Findlay, and I'm making a quick comment about the proposal for a complex issue that you people have been addressing, and it's very, very hard, and that's the homeless overnight parking. I've got about 78 people who are concerned from the pool, not rejecting anything, not accepting anything, just want to make sure what is proposed will be followed through. There are some questions about security. It's an 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. to a 7 a.m. usage of the place. The pool starts at 5:30 in the morning, goes to sometime till 1 in the morning with other activities, and people are necessarily concerned. Homeless is a huge issue, and I really commend you folks for even getting anything done, because it's very hard. But we would really like to have some indication of what's gonna happen, cleanup, enforcement, et cetera, really hard. But there are a lot of people who are concerned about it. And thank you for your effort and your time.
Thank you. Do we have any other cards? Nope. All right, Mr. McGlynn, 15.1.
Item 15.1. Public hearing petition to expand the West End residential permit parking zone. Kim Nadeau, parking manager, presenting.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. This item is to consider a petition to add the 100 block of 6th Street to the West End residential permit program. The West End permit zone was established in November of 2019. And in addition, in August of 2019, an employee preferential permit program was also established in the West End. City Code Section 11-44 establishes the process for creation of a residential permit zone, which includes residents circulating a petition seeking support from at least 60% of the residential units in the proposed area. A petition has been received from the residents of the 100 block of 6th Street with 83% support to expand the West End residential permit program. The zone would have a 2-hour time limit from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Saturday, and residents would be able to purchase permits that would allow them to park beyond that time limit. So this is a map that shows the existing West End residential permit zone, which is shown in green, and the existing employee preferential program, which is shown in, it looks to me brown, but it might be a different color for you. And then there's a very small area on 6th Street between Wilson and Davis that is the proposed expansion of the West End zone. So approving this item will provide relief to the residents, allowing them to park more easily in the area in front of their homes. We also held a public meeting to review the residential permit program, and questions were answered about how the program is run. There were 3 people in attendance who were in support of the program, and in addition, we did public notification on the block and in the Press Democrat. It's, well, I think I already said that, sorry. So it's recommended by the Finance Department that the council by resolution approve the petition to expand the West End residential parking permit zone, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great, thank you, Kim. Council, any questions? Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did have one question about this, just because I have heard from folks at the 6th Street Playhouse that the permit program we previously put in is making it a little bit of a challenge on Saturdays for some of their matinees, that most of them are 2 hours long, and the parking, people are off by about a half hour. Was there any discussion about adding maybe an additional hour to do 3 hours for parking instead of 2, or was this just driven by the neighbors there that are adding in?
I have not heard that about the 6th Street Playhouse, but the process for establishing these residential permit zones is driven by the neighborhood. And so whoever it is that takes it upon themselves to take the lead to circulate the petition is the one that is determining the perimeter and also making their recommendation on the time. So the residents came to us saying they wanted a 2-hour time limit. So that was the petition that was signed.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Dowd, do you have a question? No questions? Okay, this is a public hearing, so I'll open the public hearing, and we have one card, Betsy Hall.
Thank you for hearing me. I am the person that put together that list, and just the only other things I want to say is the 83% does not include the other 2 people that, one is an apartment that is vacant, and the other was just not home at the time that I had to get this in. The reason this has come to be an important issue right now, and I am sensitive to the 6th Street Theater issue, is there are 2 houses on our block that have no off-street parking at all, and when you have done the preferred whatever that is called, on the 6th Street other side, the Railroad Square area, that's taken over half of our parking. So as you noticed on that, it's a very tiny amount of space for 4 houses and 2 apartments and another house that's on the corner. So I just want to thank you for your consideration and let you know why we think it's really important and why it's important to have 2 hours. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, would anyone else like to address the council on this item? You don't have to fill out a card as this is a public hearing. Would anyone else like to address the council? Seeing no movement, we'll close the public hearing. Council, any additional questions? Mr. Rogers?
Sorry, just one more question for you, Kim. I know this is probably, since I've been on council, this is probably the 4th change that we've made, adding, and that's fine, but at what point do you need to have a conversation with the council about adding staff so that we're not just putting up the notices, but actually still able to enforce the 2-hour time limit?
I believe you're referring to having parking enforcement staff available.
Correct.
Yeah, we did add a part-time parking enforcement officer to our budget. It was, I can't remember now if it was this fiscal year or the prior fiscal year. I think it was this fiscal year. And that was related to the fact that we were seeing this increase in requests for residential permit zones and also the employee preferential parking. So I think we're okay for now. But that is something that we consider as we receive more, or if we receive more requests, which I expect that we will over time. So far, these have been fairly small, and they're immediately adjacent to areas that we already patrol, so it hasn't been a concern for us yet.
Okay, I appreciate that. I just don't want to give unrealistic expectation to the public, especially that if they go through this process of getting a petition, make sure that we are actually adequately patrolling as well.
I will say also that when we do our outreach, when we receive a petition, we send out a notice to not just the blocks that are being proposed, but the adjacent blocks, because we know that there tends to be a domino effect when we implement these. And so when people come to those community meetings, we make it a point to talk about the fact that try to set realistic expectations, because we would never be in a position where we would have the money to have enough staff where we could, respond immediately to every person's request. So we do try to make it known that there are some limitations to our ability to respond. But we also find that people, once we post signs, most people are wanting to comply with the time restrictions, so it tends to work pretty well.
Right. All right, thank you.
Any additional questions? Seeing none, Mr. Dowd, you have this item?
I would like to move the resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa expanding the West End residential permit parking zone and waive the reading the remainder of the text.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any additional comments? Seeing none, your votes, please. Waiting for the drum roll. And that passes unanimously. Thank you. Mr. McGlynn, item 15.2.
Item 15.2, public hearing, petition to establish the Olive Park residential permit parking zone. Kim Nadeau, presenting.
Here I am again. This one will be very similar to the last. So this is to consider a petition to establish the Olive Park residential permit parking zone. They currently do not have a residential permit program, and again, it's City Code Section 11-44 that establishes this process. This area is experiencing spillover parking from adjacent attractors, the Hyatt Hotel, Railroad Square, and the Smart Station in particular. The petition has been received from the residents. We had about over 60, there was 2 blocks. One block had 63% and the other had, I think it was 72% in favor. This would establish a 2-hour time limit from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. This one, they requested Monday through Friday, so they asked to exclude Saturdays. And again, residents can purchase permits that will allow them to be exempt from the time limits. This map shows the 2 blocks that received the required number of signatures for inclusion in the program. So the benefits of this, again, will be to improve access to parking for residents, allowing them to park beyond the posted time limits, and to deter the spillover parking. We also held a public meeting for this area and did the public notification in the Press Democrat and on the street. It's recommended by the Finance Department that the City Council by resolution approve the petition to establish the Olive Park residential permit parking zone.
Great, thank you for the presentation. Council, questions? Seeing none, this is a public hearing, so we'll open the public hearing. I have 2 cards on the item. First up, Lance South, followed by Tracy Wishart Barnes.
Good afternoon, Lance South, 331 Olive Street. First off, I wanted to thank you all for your time. I'm the manager of a sober living house that helps in aged care community by keeping mental health and other homeless people off the street. We have 17 people staying in one house. It's a dual zone, commercial and residential. I think that highly impact those people ability to park anywhere in that area, as we're in the furthest dead end down there. There's already limited parking as it is, so I don't know how we would address that. We're not a normal house with 2 or 3 people in it. There's probably at least 8 or 10 people that have vehicles there, and it's a fluid situation. We have people coming and going as the residents are in a month-to-month lease, transitional temporary housing. I just wanted to thank you for your time and just wondering how we would address that, either with temporary, non-affixed permits, and that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Tracy Wishart Barnes?
Yes, good job, good job. All right, so my name's Tracy. I live at 307 Orange Street. I live directly next door, same side of the street. We share not a wall, but an area, whatever. So the reason I'm here, for the most part, is because I would like to park in front of my house when I come home. I have a 7-year-old. I carry way too much stuff to work, but breakfast, lunch, everything. I really don't want to have to walk blocks to get to my house. And what the struggle for me is, I often come home and there's random cars parked in front of my house. I've made an effort with the SLE, different managers, there's always different people managing, to say, hey, could you ask your residents not to park in front of my house? But the problem is that there is a turnover. I mean, it is a sober living environment, so sometimes that doesn't work out and people move on. And I understand that. I run a section of behavioral health for Sonoma County, so I get recovery, I get that whole thing. But really for me, it's just that I just really want to park in front of my house. We also have abandoned cars that just kind of get left, maybe when people do move on. Another issue is people whose partner is in the SLE, I've seen this at least 2 times, sleep in their cars on the block. There was an RV that was multiple months that had to keep moving different areas. People kept saying, please don't park your RV in front of our house. Another time we had to call the cops like 3 times because this lady and her boyfriend kept getting in fights at the car right around the corner from our house. So this is why we want the permits. We want people that are gonna that live there permanently to have a place to park. If you are, the SLE has a very large, I think it's a U-shaped driveway. They have space to put people, and for the people they can't house, I feel like those people are the ones who should walk the block and a half it is to get to the SLE. Homes built in 1900 do not have garages. They didn't think they were necessary. Or, they didn't have cars. What? So they don't have garages. So there's nowhere else to park but on the street. I think that probably covers it. I mean, the idea that 17 people live in one house is not normal. I mean, it's not the average home. So I feel like there needs to be an accommodation here that maybe they don't get to park right outside the SLE and that they have to walk to another area. So I really am in support of the permit parking. I feel that I have the right to park in front of my house. Oh, and I made it.
Thank you. All right, those are all the cards, but you don't have to fill out a card. Anyone else like to address the council on this item? Seeing no movement, we'll close the public hearing, bring it back to council. Any additional questions? Seeing none, Mr. Oliveris, you have this item.
Thank you. Move resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa establishing the Olive Park residential permit parking zone and wait for the reading of the text.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any additional comments? Seeing none, your votes, please. And that passes with 6 ayes, with Mr. Tibbetts being absent. Thank you. Mr. McGlynn, item 15.3.
Item 15.3, public hearing. Second 12-month automatic tentative map extension. Adam Ross, you don't look like Adam, presenting.
Mr. Mayor, members, while Adam gets the PowerPoint set up, just to add a little context, the item before you is the automatic 1-year time extension for subdivision maps. These are for maps that were valid during the times of the fire in 2017. And this is very similar to what the state has done during times of crisis. Back in the economic recession, the state did a very similar thing and had to do this over a series of several extensions. And the express purpose is to allow the development of those subdivisions that were valid during the time of this fire event. With that, I'll turn it over to Adam Ross, City Planner.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Again, I'm Adam Ross, City Planner. It is the second 12-month automatic tentative map extension and associated entitlements. It's a proposed text amendment to the zoning code chapter 20-16 under the Resilient City Development Measures. It adds a second automatic 12-month extension to maps and associated entitlements. It applies only to maps which received the first automatic extension. It addresses continued housing needs citywide following the October 2017 fires. In October 2016, Council accepted the Housing Action Plan addressing ongoing unmet housing needs. Following in June 2017, Council priorities adopted the implementation of a comprehensive housing strategy. In October 2017, the fires damaged or destroyed approximately 3,000 homes and 100 commercial structures where a local emergency was declared and the Resilient City Overlay District was created. In April and May of 2018, the council adopted the Resilient City Development Measures. In November 2018, the Planning Commission recommended approval of the first 12-month automatic extension, and in December, the the council adopted the ordinance number ORD 2019-001. The ordinance it applies to tentative subdivision maps, vesting tentative subdivision maps, and tentative parcel maps that were valid on October 9th, 2017, which were subject to the previous ordinance passed by the council. It applies to 36 subdivisions totaling 975 housing units. There's a potential for more housing and commercial projects that could benefit. Discretionary land use approvals that were approved in conjunction with the map would also be extended along with the map. Here's an image of the tentative maps throughout the city. The notification process included one in Press Democrat, email notice to the Community Advisory Board, and it was posted at City Hall. The adoption of the proposed ordinance is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to 15061B3 common sense exemption and CEQA section 15183, which is consistent with the community plan, general plan, or zoning. It is recommended by the Planning Commission and the Planning and Economic Development Department that the City Council introduce an ordinance amending City Code Chapter 20-16 Resilient City Development Measures to add a second 12-month automatic tentative map extension to address continued housing needs and economic development needs within the city following the Tubbs and Nuns fire of October 2017, file number REZ 19-012. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Great, thanks for that presentation. Council, questions? Seeing none, this is also a public hearing, so we'll open up the public hearing, and I believe Dwayne is left. Dwayne, are you here? You leave any messages for you? No? All right, would anyone like to address the council on this item? Seeing no movement, we'll close the public hearing, bring it back to council. Any questions developed since I last asked? Okay, Mr. Sawyer, you have this item.
Thank you, Mayor. Introduce an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa, amending Title 20 of the Santa Rosa City Code to amend Chapter 20-16, Resilient City Development Measures, by adding Section 20-16.130, second 12-month automatic extension for tentative maps and associated entitlements to address continued housing and economic development needs within the city following the Tubbs and Nuns fires of October 2017. File number REZ 19-013, and wait for the reading of the text.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any additional comments? Seeing none, your votes, please. And that passes unanimously with 7 ayes. Thank you for the presentation. We have no written communications. Do we have any additional comment cards? None. No other items on the agenda. Meeting adjourned.